Do you ever run hybrid games where you combine RPGs with other game types, such as board or card games?
Occasionally, I've considered doing that sort of thing. When I was planning out a game of Dust, I was going to combine the sort of Dust Risk-alike game, which is hard to come by these days, with the tactical game and possibly with the role-playing game as well, so that you could show the progress on the world map of the various factions, and then player actions and so on could tip the scales in one direction or another. Never really got to play that because the RPG was rather disappointing, shall we say, unfortunately, and Dust has since turned to dust. So, so much for that. I almost did this when I was running a Legend of the Five Rings campaign, but that was more that the game had battle rules, and so what the players were doing was going on, and then to resolve battles between the various clans and factions and so on, I determined that separately, not necessarily with player input unless they were actually present at the battle. So that's not quite what you're asking for in a lot of ways. I think the closest thing I've done that's actually come through to what you're asking about was that in games of Cyberpunk we got fed up with having to pause everyone else's play to deal with the Netrunner. So what I started doing was creating data fortresses from the card game, the Netrunner card game, which doesn't exist anymore, but kind of does in a different form through FF. So you can still get it, kind of. You might be able to pick up some decks cheap of the original game, which is more properly cyberpunk themed. So while the rest of us would carry on with the adventure in real time, or as close there too, the Netrunner would play their cards out and try to hack their way through the data fortress that I'd laid out for them, constructed from my decks. And then once they had done that, then their hack could be considered to be done. So that kind of kept the Netrunner occupied over to one side, acting much faster than the rest of us, which is how Netrunner time works. But we could continue playing uninterrupted. So that worked pretty well. I have to say, I was quite pleased with the way that worked out. It did require something of an investment in cards. This idea is definitely a good one, but ideally you want the games at the different levels to have broadly compatible rules in some way, or at least to operate on the same scale. One other thing we did do was to improvise a Crimson Skies RPG using Fate, but then to handle some of the more in-depth air duels and so on using the old board game. And that worked quite well. So it's definitely something you can do. It's just finding something that ties together in the way that you really, really want it to is tricky. And this is kind of like the old concept of transmedia, where your tentpole production, your film or whatever, would have a series that goes along with it, comics that go along with it, and so on. No one really seems to have taken this kind of holistic approach when it comes to gaming, and I suspect it's because one game or the other would suffer from needing compatibility with the others. The one great example, or that used to be a great example, I think, would probably be Heavy Gear, where you can seamlessly transition from the role-playing game to the skirmish game and back again. And it does it much better than MechWarrior and Battletech ever did.